Speaking of which, there's some pretty famous atheists and agnostics that will, even though they don't believe, they will admit that he was a historical figure, that he actually did live,
Yes.
and that these are records of his life. And now they may not believe, they may not agree with his message or whatever. That's beside the point. But is it Bart Ehrman?
Bart Ehrman, I would take what he says with a grain of salt because he definitely comes from an agnostic perspective. But as someone who was a historian, and still is a historian, and someone who deeply, deeply studied the scriptures. He got his degree from Princeton Seminary, master's degree, and was literally working alongside Bruce Metzger, the top manuscript evidence, expert out there. Bart Ehrman shares with the world very openly, and even has proved to atheists that Yahshua was a real person, a historical figure.
He was not just some concoction.
Not fictional at all. And so that's a big thing to say.
Also, I think another one looking at Gerd Ludermann, is that right? And from Germany.
Yeah.
He says that the facts of how, he's not a believer, but the facts of the historical account is indisputable, I believe is his words.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's many actual critics out there, whether atheist, whether agnostic, whether, people who are just searching out this stuff for themselves, will say that these manuscripts that we have are reliable. And they're historical. And so that's a big statement to come from people who may not see how the scriptures are the word of Elohim and that we have a creator, that we have a savior. It's hard for me to see how they could come to that conclusion. And I've heard the arguments, but I've watched many debates with Bart Ehrman. It's comes up empty most of the time. But still, they are at least honest with saying, guys, you can't ignore the evidence.
Right.
So I think that's a pretty big statement to say.
One thing on being able to trust this as a fact, as far as these things happened. One thing that really struck with me is a couple things. Number one, we know that Yah says that everything is established by 2 or 3 witnesses. Well, he's given us 4 in the Gospels, right? But not only that, the Messiah's disciples themselves, if this was just some big concocted story, I think all of us, if we can just reason with each other for just a moment, that they all went to their brutal deaths, professing who he was, and that Messiah rose from the dead, the resurrection, which was absurd to most people. They went to their deaths,
yes,
and never recanted their story ever.
Right.
And I think you and I both know, and anyone listening, that it's as soon as like one person died or got martyred, the story would fall apart in a second if they were just making it all up, or if they just had some random hallucination. They saw what they saw, and they proclaimed it, and they went to their deaths and never recanted their story. To me, that's huge.
It's big, and we actually have historical accounts outside of Scripture that prove that.
Yeah.
That we see people writing about the disciples and that they went to their death believing in something that to them was crazy, but to them was absolute certainty, truth. And so some of those historical records are like Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian. So that's an interesting point there. He was non-Christian.
Right.
And yet he wrote about Yahshua.
Right.
And the life that he had and the disciples he had.
He lived AD 37 to 100. So right there.
Literally.
He was there.
Yes, he had to have been. I mean, so the dates of Yeshua's life, death, burial, resurrection is somewhat debated as to exactly when.
Right.
But still, I mean, AD 37, if he was born right then, that's like either right during the Messiah's teaching and, or death, burial, resurrection is right around that time, It's definitely right around the time of when Yeshua would have been telling his disciples to go out, make disciples of all nations, right? Well, and then so he lived till AD 100, which I would say that he was around during the time of Paul and the disciples' teaching and the literal widespread of this, of the New Testament or of the accounts of Yeshua, right? Flavius Josephus wrote a history of Judaism in about the year 93. The famous Antiquities of the Jews. This is a very quoted historical source that we have. And in his writings, he mentions a number of figures from the New Testament, including Yeshua, John the Baptist,
right.
And Yeshua's brother James.
Right.
So those are, I mean, significant characters in the New Testament. And he's mentioning them as being those, those people who were right there alongside the ministry of Yahshua. And we know that's what's also interesting is that James did not accept Yahshua at first.
Until afterwards, right?
Until afterwards. And so the fact that he's quoting him, and if I remember correctly, he quoted him in saying that even though James did not accept him at first, he was there promoting Yahshua. Right. So I think that's a big deal. Well, then we see Tacitus, who came just shortly after Josephus, who is a Roman historian, and he confirms that the crucifixion of Yahshua really took place. And he wrote in his annals the records of the death of Yahshua at the hand of Pontius Pilate. He distinguishes between confirmed and hearsay in his historical accounts, making him a much more trustworthy source. And the fact that he's able to say, well, some people say that, and but he's looking into it and saying, but this is this is what I see. And so I feel like that's someone that, if we're going to look at his accounts, even though he may be against Yahshua, he's at least showing that, well, maybe the Jews want to cover this up, but he was an actual figure. Yahshua was an actual person. And he was actually crucified by the hands of Pontius Pilate. We see another Pliny the Younger, who came after Tacitus, a Roman governor in Asia Minor, established that early Christians worshipped Yahshua as Elohim. So there was, early Christians that were going around, and this is written by a Roman historian. And if I remember correctly, Pliny the Younger really promoted the killing, mass murdering of Christians. And so if Rome, for some reason, was trying to cover this up, cover up the whole Yahshua story, or make it up, and trying to convey with the Jews, maybe, that this was a cover-up, this wasn't real, this wasn't true. Maybe the Jews wanted to pay the Roman people to cover the story up somehow. They're doing a really bad job.
Furthermore, some people have recently said that Rome even concocted the whole story. And
that's what I'm getting at right there,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
And the fact that the fact that people think that or say that, I mean, the historical evidence would say otherwise.
Don't you think Rome would write about their governors and officers in a much more positive light?
Yeah.
Instead of seeming to be kind of weak?
I actually have a point on that, and I'd like to go a little deeper on that.
Sure.
So the fact that in the Gospels there is a discouraging view of the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, priests, and even the Roman courts, right, proves that these documents should have not been popular, as in the manuscripts of the New Testament. They shouldn't have been popular, right? And to the fact that they discourage people from following men like the Pharisees, scribes, Sadducees, and it kind of puts the Romans in kind of a weak view, right? Pontius Pilate not sure of knowing what to do. Herod kind of being laughing at Yahshua, and
I don't know what to do with him.
I don't know what to do. I'll send him to Pontius. It kind of makes them look weak.
Right.
Like they can't get anything out of him.
If they concocted that story, I think they would have had their stuff together a little better.
I think so too. And I think they probably would have made it look like the strength of Rome, as all the other documents perceive them as. So these documents really show embarrassing moments for these people, and we also see in the scriptures Yahshua calling out the Pharisees, the scribes, and the Sadducees for their hypocrisy. And so if the Jews didn't want this to get widespread, they probably, or maybe they wanted to cover it up. Why would they put that in there? Or why would that be even covered in this? I've heard that argument that it's just a false story created to pursue people,
to quell the Jews from further revolts,
right?
To give them some pacifist Messiah to quell the revolts,
and that doesn't add up if you're looking at the text that's actually written there. So this would prove that the gospel accounts would not have been a popular thing, but it was. It was spread all over the place, all over the world, everywhere. There were many converts due to the manuscripts that were spread, and as well as what Peter and Paul, John and James are writing about. These were widespread.
Right.
I don't know how we could say it was written by one source, comparing all the copies and comparing all the variations. It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So to me, the fact that there is such a argument out there doesn't quite add up to me, but I think people are going to try to find a way to refute this in any way they can. They'll try to throw out these things, you know? And, it's interesting. To me, I would think that if the Jews really didn't want Yahshua to be, out there or to be known, then they probably wouldn't have acknowledged him as a person or a historical being. They probably would have just made, he wasn't real.
Right, which brings us to number 4. His name was preserved in the Jewish rabbinic literature known as the Talmud. The Talmud, if you're not familiar, is the central document regarding Jewish law and interpretations. I'm very familiar with this. I actually grew up Jewish, as you know. Later, of course, found the truth in Messiah. But in the Talmud, which is the Jews' main source of theology and thought, Messiah is actually mentioned several times in here. They mention him, not in a good light. They mention him burning in hell, and the reason for it, it says because he defied the sages, and which actually corroborates the story of the Gospels.
Right, that's a fact.
It corroborates the story that because in the Gospels, a big part of Messiah's testimony, a big part of his teaching was to rebuke the man-made traditions, because what the Pharisees, the religious leaders at the time, had done is they had taken the laws that the Most High gave them and added all these extra laws on top of it, and sometimes even just skirted around the laws of the Most High and kind of made their own. And so very often we saw Messiah rebuking them. And so it's interesting that in their rabbinical source in their text, that's exactly what they say. They say he defied the sages, and because of that, he's burning in hell eternally. Anyways, there's other mentions of him as well. They said that he was a magician, a sorcerer, all sorts of things, which is exactly what they accused him of. To quote loosely here, paraphrase. They accused Messiah of being of Beelzebub, one of the devils, and that's the only way he was able to cast out these demons out of people, was because he was, working for these demons. So it's interesting that they've preserved that inadvertently in their text,
right? Which is in Scripture. It's in the New Testament.
If he never existed, and the things that are written in the New Testament never happened, they would have never wrote about him.
Right.
They would have just said, "There's some legend about so and so that he never existed."
Right.
But they don't say that.
Nope.
They confirmed that he existed and the things that he said and did.
Yeah, and so that leads us to our last historical figure that we have here, which there's quite a bit out there. There's many sources out there, historical figures who write about these documents, who write about Yahshua and his disciples. But we just have like 5 sources here that we just wanted to briefly go over. But search it out. I would say search all this out, because there is so much evidence for the Gospels, so much evidence for the New Testament. Another person would be this satirist Lucian, who came after Pliny the Younger, and he's a pagan author. And while ridiculing the Christians, yet he still acknowledged the existence of Yahshua. And that's another source, a historical source that shows us that these people at least acknowledge that Yahshua was a real person. So I think we could do a little bit of deductive reasoning here, right? So we can see that all these people wrote about these figures, and now they're writing from the perspectives of their religion, right? Rome, and its strength and its might and dignity and honor and power, right? They're like, well, these Christians, they don't know what they're doing, right? And then Jewish people just hate Yahshua. So they're like, the Jews wanted to make him look like a evil person, right? That the miracles that he did are just not true. But we can at least pull from these sources and say they all accepted that he was a real person. So I think we could just think through that a little more, right? That shows something there. We also see that the Caesars that were mentioned in the Bible, we have found coins with their faces inscribed on the coins, archaeological evidence. So this is archaeological finds.
These are real people.
Yeah, that they're real Caesars that were there during the proposed times in the documents in the Gospels. Matches up perfectly with when we find where the coins are coming from and what dates they were found in. So it's like these are these are archaeological finds that prove that, Yahshua is who he is. And there's also even more archaeological evidence that I didn't get time to go into, but there's even more that proves Yahshua did his ministry where he said he did his ministry, or where the gospel writers said he did.
We'll make sure to leave links so that you can search out all these things that were mentioned. Like I said at the beginning, we're kind of briefly covering a lot of these topics, and we'll leave you the trail of evidence that you can search it out for yourself.
Yeah, the little breadcrumbs.
That's right.
So another point I really just briefly wanted to make is that there's this claim that Yeshua's life, death, burial, resurrection is just a mirror image of all the other pagan gods, and so it quote unquote discredits Yeshua's teachings, writings, all that. Well, that idea was popularized by a movie called Zeitgeist. I do not recommend. And it just says that, Yeshua's birth, death, burial, resurrection were just mirrors of these pagan deities. The assumptions made in this movie are without any historical evidence. I mean, like not one historical evidence proves their points.
With lots of twisting and lots of actual just misinformation.
It's straight up fabricated.
Yeah.
And they don't even come close to the actual story of these pagan gods. So if they're trying to make mention of how it mirrors Yeshua, they would at least try to get the pagan gods' lives right, because they don't trust the historical documents that are over 5,800 of the manuscripts that we have of Yeshua, just in the Greek, but they'll look at the historical documents that are very few and far between for these pagan deities, and they still got it wrong. And they still didn't actually look into the historical evidence. And just to say, this just because something similar happened to people and other people in antiquity, these other pagan deities, does not dismiss the facts of the resurrection of Yeshua. The other pagan gods have no credible evidence for their existence, like the New Testament does,
right.
And the accounts of the resurrection. We just don't see the same amount of evidence at all. The Roman Catholic Church, right, kind of did a little bit of this where they kind of combined, like Constantine, came in and he combined the, Mithritism and Christianity to try and gain both people, right? And it's really, it was successful at the time, unfortunately, but it's sad because then you lose more of the truth.
Right.
You lose more and more of the truth. And so if you're trying to compare Christianity or Yeshua, following Yeshua, to what these other deities are, you're going to lose sight of what the documents say, of what the manuscripts show us, what it truly shows us to be like, how it truly shows us to walk, and what we're supposed to be doing.
And thankfully, the people of Yah that trust in His word got this foreshadowed. This was going to happen. Daniel 7:25 prophesied that the fourth beast, the fourth kingdom, which is Rome, that would be ruling until the end, said that they will change times and laws, and they shall be giving it into his hand. And that's exactly what they did. They changed the calendar into their solar calendar, and they've changed the laws. So like we mentioned, Constantine, he changed the seventh-day Sabbath to the first day of the week, Sunday, and it's still perpetuated today in mainstream Christianity. As you mentioned, they took pagan festivals and kind of just slapped really just a Christian label over it. And that's why, and what they've done is they've created a very easy straw man argument, because it's very easy to what his exact birth is, we don't know, but we know it wasn't December 25th. And so that's why when movies like this, they attack the easy straw man argument of the false, he was born on December 25th, which is right around the solstice, which some of these pagan gods were, a lot of their
quote unquote birth during that time.
Birth, right. And speaking of which, speaking of Zeitgeist, like one of the pagan deities they mentioned that also had a virgin birth. Well, when you actually research it, it said they were just born out of a rock. It came forth out of a rock. And I'm like, how is that a virgin birth? And so
you don't get
just
that.
Outright lies through this that have been perpetuated.
Yeah, and there's even a scholar of Hinduism who, saw the claims of Zeitgeist and was appalled that, in regards to Krishna being somewhat similar to Christ, Yeshua, it's like, she was like, that's not right at all. The facts aren't even there. So to me, we see that this movie is very easily disproven in its claims. And so, and that's something that people really latched onto and denied Yeshua as their Messiah because of these claims. Right. And so we really need to work in our hearts at searching these things out, looking into the evidence. We're living in a time where we're actually able to go onto computers, laptops, and find this evidence so quickly. And so it should be even easier for us to disprove any claims that are out there in regards to disproving Yahshua.
There's a lot of spiritual apathy out there. People are just happy with what is hand-fed to them.
Yeah.
But we know that the scriptures say in Proverbs, I think it's 25:2, it's the glory of Elohim. Elohim is the Hebrew word for God. It's the glory of Elohim to conceal a thing, and it's the honor of kings to search out the matter. And so that's what we feel like we're doing here, and we're thankful that you're with us, and we're hopefully that you also want to have this honor as a king to search out these matters. And
we're called to be kings and priests.
Yes.
And to be set apart, holy to Yah, just as the Levitical priests were.
Right.
And I think part of that process is really digging deep in our doubts and our fears and our worries and searching these matters out. We really need to figure these things out for ourselves. It's part of our process of growing in our faith. I know, just doing the research I did in the apologetics of defending the faith of Yahshua, man, I found so much that just revitalized and even strengthened an even stronger foundation for me in my faith. And so I encourage everyone, just go search it out, Right. I think this is really why there's so many textual variants out there. I honestly think that's part of the reason. I'm sure there's people out there that are thinking, well, if God is such a good God, why wouldn't he just write his book that he wants us all to read and make billions of copies?
Even more specifically asked, atheists commonly ask, well, if God exists, isn't he strong enough to just preserve his text without any errors, without any variants? What would you say to that?
I would say that, yes, Elohim is capable of doing anything like that. But I think he desires a relationship with us. And that requires us to search out the matter. That requires us to have faith, to lean not on our own understanding, but to trust in him. And so if he was just giving us this document perfectly from the sky and every single person had it, it would just be like force-feeding truth. Like, this is what you're supposed to believe. But that's not the loving creator we have. We actually have a creator who genuinely wants a relationship with us, who genuinely wants us to seek him out, to search for him. And that's why we see that proverb, can you quote it again? Just Proverbs.
Hopefully I got it right, but it's the glory of Elohim to conceal a thing, and it's the honor of kings to search out a matter.
I always mix it up in my brain.
Like
so yeah,
hopefully that's right.
I think that is so true. What we really need to lean on him and trust in him. And sometimes things may not make sense. Sometimes you may be looking into this evidence and you're like, I just don't understand some of this. Well, faith really requires you to kind of lean on him, to trust in him, because the words that are in here, I think we can really understand that this is coming from a loving creator. Right. Who genuinely just wants us to love him.
And as you said, I think it's Hebrews 11:6, it says that we must have faith and to seek him out diligently. And that's what he wants.
He wants us to be prepared to give an answer.
And quite frankly, and this is a whole other subtopic we don't need to get into, but all it really takes is for someone to step outside and look around and look at the majesty of everything he's created and to recognize this is not some haphazard thing that was created through space dust. This is purposeful creation with so much depth and intelligence and magnificence that if a creator existed, he would reach out to us and give us the information we needed to know.
Right.
And we believe, if maybe we can, I think we can maybe finish up this topic. We believe that he has given that to us.
Yes.
And given it to us through the hands of men.
Absolutely.
And, there may be some scribal errors here and there, but we believe, like I said, 99%, we believe that the New Testament, alongside the Old Testament, are trustworthy documents that we can know exactly how the Creator is communicating with us and what we need to do to be with him in eternal life.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to further that claim by saying I don't think Yahshua is a dictator in the sky creating robots. No. He's not wanting that. He's not showing that. He's wanting us to love him. So I hope it encourages everyone to look out there and to love
Which
him.
is what I really love about him. He gives us choice.
Yes.
To love him, to not love him. So he's communicated to us through the Torah, the law, the prophets, the writings, and the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament or New Covenant, however you want to call it. And it's up to us to accept it or not. That's the freedom he gives us. Bees, they do what they do. They don't have an option. You know? Coyotes, they do what they do. And for some of you farmers out there, unfortunate. But humans, he's given us the option, and I find it beautiful that, like you said, he doesn't force us to.
Right.
And we all have the option. And through his word, he's communicated that if we believe in him and we believe in the testimony that he's given his son, and if we follow him, which we'll talk about more, and this might be a couple-part series. We mentioned some of that, like as far as the Sabbath and different things. But if we follow him and we believe that we believe that there is eternal life,
yes,
and that's available freely to all of us,
yes,
and so he gives us a choice. So very thankful for him.